Welcome to First Words, a podcast presented by the First United Methodist Church of Florence. Today's message is brought to you by Associate Pastor Reverend Dr. Terry Stubblefield.
The last 2 weeks we have celebrated the life of Christ with Palm Sunday, where he's greeted as a king, and then Easter, we celebrated his resurrection. Well, in today's Bible reading, we enter the narrative after the crucifixion, after the resurrection, and there's a scandal developing. Early in the morning, the day after the Sabbath, some women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and some other women came to the grave to finish the burial preparations. But when they saw that the stone to the tomb had been moved, they ran and told Peter and John that someone's taken the body of Jesus and we don't know where he is. Well, even for the believers, the disciples, many of them believed that the body had been stolen and put somewhere to prove what Jesus said was going to be true, that after 3 days, I'll be resurrected, I'll live again. It was the beginning of a conspiracy, a scandal in many people's eyes. Well, during the lifetime of Jesus, he had talked about his death and resurrection. He had predicted, he had prophesied these things that were going to happen. In Matthew 16, Mark 8, and Luke 9, Jesus had just fed a large crowd that had come to see him and to hear him speak. And he said of himself, the Son of Man will suffer, be rejected, be killed, but be raised again. And that's when Peter said, "Oh no, Lord, not to you." And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan. Don't tempt me. This is what I came for." Well, in Matthew 17, and Mark 9, and Luke 9, after the transfiguration, Jesus said to his apostles, "The Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill me, but I'll be raised on the third day." And then in Matthew 20 and Mark 10 and Luke 18, as Jesus and disciples were on their way to Jerusalem for their last Passover, Jesus said, "When we get to Jerusalem, I'll be mocked, I'll be scourged, I'll be crucified, but I will rise again." Jesus had told his closest disciples in John 13:33, "Where I'm going, you can't come right now." And then in John 14, Jesus said, "After I go back to heaven to my Father, I will send you the Holy Spirit to be your helper and your comforter." Well, the disciples, the followers of Jesus during his lifetime, didn't understand what Jesus was talking about. They were confused. The Pharisees knew the prophecies of the Old Testament and Isaiah in Psalms. And they came to Pilate and they said, "You remember Jesus said that after I die, the third day I will rise again? We want to prevent that story from coming true. We want that tomb sealed and we want a guard placed." And that's what Pilate did. The Pharisees and the chief priests and the rulers were so afraid that the disciples would steal the body and then tell that Jesus had risen from the dead. Well, in today's text, we find that the disciples of Christ were in hiding. Their leader had been killed. They were fearful for their own lives. When the women reported to the disciples that the body of Jesus was gone, Luke 24 reported that the disciples didn't believe the story and dismissed it as women's nonsense. Peter went to see for himself and he returned to the hideout wondering, what has happened? Where is he? After the resurrection, we know that the chief priests and the elders bribed the soldiers that were guarding the tomb to say that the disciples of Jesus had come and stolen the body of Jesus to prove that he rose from the dead. Well, how are the disciples going to handle this scandal? How will they spin this story? How would Jesus handle this scandal? In John 20, verses 11 through 17, while the women are at the tomb crying, they realize Jesus is not dead. He's here. He is risen. Jesus appears at the tomb. He tells his followers that he's alive and he's awaiting his ascension to heaven to be with his Father. So he begins to address this looming scandal of the empty tomb and heal the damage of his crucifixion that was described as a scandal. During the scandal, Jesus doesn't hide. He reveals himself. He makes himself known to those who love him. Now, in our own lives, when we're going through our personal struggles, our disappointments, our hurts, the scandals of our lives, the temptation is to hide. We may not be attending worship services. We resist fellowship with family and friends and church. We may be distant from those people that we love the most. And sometimes it may be beneficial to take a short break, to retreat for a while. But at some point, we must do what Jesus did. We must make ourselves visible and address the scandals in our lives. It seems like we live in an age of scandal. If you get news apps on your phone, Newsbreak and all that, most of the first stories you'll read are some catastrophe or scandal. We're fascinated with scandals. In fact, there's a website that lists the top 10 scandals of 2022. And you know I love these things. Kanye West stated that he admires Hitler and he posted death con on Jewish people. Amber Heard accused her husband, Johnny Depp, of abuse. And to right that scandal, he countersued and won $15 million to clear his name. Herschel Walker ran as a conservative for the Senate in Georgia, supporting traditional family values and opposing abortions. And then women came forward that told that he forced them to have abortions and that he was guilty of violence and infidelity. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Britain, hosted and attended various functions during the very strict COVID lockdown in Great Britain. Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. The slap heard around the world. Kevin Spacey was charged with sexual abuse, and he played the president in the miniseries House of Cards. Shakira owes about $15 million in taxes to the Spanish government and is accused of tax fraud. And then there's these scandals. The two guys who stuffed lead weights into the fish they caught to win the Lake Erie Walleye Trail Fishing Tournament. And listen to this. In the Cornhole League World Championship Series, there is such a thing. The number one ranked doubles cornhole team was found with cornhole bags that were smaller than regulation size. Then there's the really terrible scandals like Jeffrey Epstein, guilty of fraud and blackmail and sex abuse. Bernie Madoff, who bilked investors out of somewhere between $50 and $70 billion, taking many people's life savings. George Santos, in order to win election to the U.S. House of Representatives, and he won, claimed to be a college graduate with degrees in finance and economics. He claimed to have worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, that he owned rental properties that he used to benefit those of lesser means, was a descendant of Holocaust survivors, that he was gay, that he was biracial, that 9/11 claimed his mother's life. He had 4 employees killed in the Pulse nightclub shooting, and he founded Friends of Pets Unlimited that had rescued 2,500 animals. And all of these claims were found to be false. They were lies. It was a scandal. But he won. The scandal concerning the resurrection of Jesus was a scandal because it was not a scandal. Jesus was resurrected. Jesus is alive. Jesus chose to make himself visible after the resurrection and after the news reported by some that his body was just stolen. So in doing so, he gave hope to his followers and set in motion a movement that gives eternal hope to every one of us, that there is life after death. And Jesus didn't stop there. Jesus continues to handle this scandal by telling his own story. In John 20, he appears to the disciples. He shows them his wounds from the crucifixion. Then in verses 21 through 23, Jesus tells his disciples, "As the Father sent me, I now send you," to start a new chapter in their lives and for us. The disciples have been empowered. The brokenhearted have been comforted. Peace has been given. And now it's time for Jesus to move on. Now, one of the biggest mistakes we make in our lives when we have hurts, disappointments, our own scandals, is that we make a temporary spot, a temporary stop, a long-term stay. No personal struggle or scandal should last forever. At some point, we have to move on and write a new chapter in our lives. And we can do that because God will help us. God will strengthen us. He will empower us. He will forgive us and give us a second chance, or another second chance, or the 100th second chance. The disciples, the followers of Jesus who had failed Jesus, who had denied Jesus, who left Jesus and are in hiding, are now bold enough to preach the resurrected Jesus in public. And it changed their lives. They saw Jesus and they're telling their stories. Taking the man we call Doubting Thomas, maybe we should let him be our guide, not afraid to ask questions, to seek evidence, and to see with open eyes the revelation that Jesus is Lord. All of us, with God's help, can overcome the dark days, the scandals of our lives. And we must do like Jesus did. Make ourselves visible, tell our stories, and start a new chapter. And God is always there to help us. Start over again. Praise be to God.
Thank you for listening to First Words. For more information about our services or how to get involved in our community, visit us at fumcflorence.org or facebook.com/FlorenceFUMC.